All right, friends, it's time to give you loyal listeners a discount on protein powder. You may or may not know, but I launched my very first protein powder 2 years ago. It's a grass-fed beef isolate with only 3 ingredients: grass-fed beef, either organic cacao or organic vanilla, and organic monk fruit. Now, if you don't want any of the added flavor and sweeteners, you can also just get unflavored. And no matter what flavor you choose, you're getting over 23 grams of protein per scoop, which is going to keep you full and satisfied between meals. I love starting my day with a Fab4 smoothie and breaking my fast with that much protein. It makes a serious difference in my cravings and blood sugar balance the rest of the day, and I've seen it with my clients as well. Now, I never thought I'd own a product company, but when I got pregnant with Sebastian, I realized the majority of protein powders were chemically extracted or enzymatically extracted, and I wanted to use heat and water only. I wanted minimal ingredients because we don't need those emulsifiers, fillers, or added vitamins, minerals, and probiotics. All of those additions increase the chances that it's not going to work for your body, whether it be bloating, digestion issues. I just wanted pure, clean protein to keep you full and satisfied so you could build the most delicious Fab4 smoothie. And I have to say, I'm pretty proud of the flavor. If you take a look at our reviews on Amazon, you'll see 5-star reviews for flavor. And that is key, because if you don't love your Fab4 smoothie and you don't love drinking your protein powder, you're not going to do it. It won't become a habit, and it's consistency that outpaces everything. So if you're here and you're listening and you want to give our protein powder a try, use the code podcast5 for $5 off your order. And let me know if you love it. My favorite ways to apply this protein powder is in my Fab4 smoothie, making freezer fudge, making chocolate milk, making hot chocolate, and throwing the unflavored into all my kids' baked goods. So let me know how you use it. Let me know if you love it, and share this podcast deal with your friends. Welcome back to the show. I'm so excited for today's guest. But before we get started, a little announcement. The vanilla protein powder is finally shipping at the end of this week. So thank you all for your patience. You know, I'm unwilling to use a different form of vanilla. I don't want dextrose. I don't want maltodextrin. I don't want extracts. We're using an organic vanilla powder. And because of a little bit of a worldwide shortage, it was delayed. So just thank you so much for your patience. I will continue to fight for you guys to have quality ingredients. And I really just appreciate your understanding with the timeline. So we're shipping those out at the end of this week. And I'm personally so excited to get the vanilla back in my kitchen so I can make a spa smoothie as well. All right, without further ado, let's get to the show. Brigid Titgemeier is not only my friend, someone I look up to, but she was also my mentee when she started her own private practice. Brigid Titgemeier is a functional medicine registered dietitian, a health advocate on a mission to transform your health through personalized nutrition. She has a master's in public health nutrition and a board certification in integrative and functional nutrition. She was the founding dietitian at the Cleveland Clinic with Dr. Mark Hyman and previously worked with Dr. Michael Rosen. Brigid and I agree on, well, pretty much everything. This podcast goes into how to increase your immunity for flu season and with the current COVID-19 crisis, how nutrition and lifestyle plays a part. Also, how you can use an elimination diet and reintroduction plan to eat the foods you love, and so much more. So I'm so excited for this podcast. I could have talked to Brigid for hours. Again, you guys are going to love her. Don't forget to follow along with her socially. She is putting out the good stuff. So let's get to the show. Brigid, you're such a big girl now. I'm just kidding. It's so awesome to have you on the podcast today. I honestly feel like you've always been one of my favorite humans, but it's just really fun to see you step out into your own, out from under the Cleveland Clinic umbrella, and just really start sharing such valuable information for your clients and for everyone following you on Instagram. I'm obsessed with your background and your point of view. And I'm just really happy to have you. So thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. It's I can't even explain how much of an honor it is, especially with you starting as my mentor so many years ago. And I'm just always so inspired by everything that you put out into the world, whether it's the messaging that you communicate around nutrition and the science behind it, in addition to just like the powerhouse that you are with the brand that you've built. It's such an honor.
Oh gosh. Well, I feel like I'm going to blink and I'm going to be like, Brigid, you got to teach me everything you're doing. I don't know how to use technology and what if I know? No, it's really good. It's really good. I mean, I just think there's a really, really big need for a functional nutrition approach. And I think there's a really big need for access to information and people who can look at PubMed research and studies and give people the Cliff Notes, because I feel like we're just not getting a lot of information, especially during this pandemic. What do you think?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. It's been so frustrating during the pandemic to see the lack of information that's been coming out from the CDC and from the World Health Organization. Of course, there's been so much coming out about the need for standard public health procedures like wearing a mask and washing your hands. And I'm not here to refute any of that, but what I think has really been missing in the conversation is an active public health campaign to say, if we're going to shut everything down and lock you in your homes and cut off access to gyms and for some people access to healthy foods, then like, here's the recommendations that we want to provide. We think you should be eating Fab4, like balancing your blood sugar or something. I mean, something would have been better than nothing. I think that now on the back end, we're seeing 7 months worth of people being at home and having compromised metabolic health that's in a worse state than when we started, with elevated blood sugar levels, weight gain, the sugar cravings, and like binge eating that I'm hearing about from clients, and I'm sure that you're hearing about as well, because of all of the stress that people are under when they're also locked at home, like right next to their pantry, in addition to the heightened level of anxiety and the worsened outcomes of mental health. And I don't mean to start out this podcast on such a negative note, but it's just been infuriating to watch. It really highlights how much the United States government, and this is not political at all, it's like no matter really from the last 50 years, the United States government doesn't prioritize creating health recommendations. They prioritize more reactive recommendations. And there's such a disconnect between the optimal nutrition and optimal health and just standard procedures that are necessary. So when it first all started, I think that it was like in March that I had written an article on my website, beingbrigid.com, about using food as medicine for nutrition. And at that time, there was a few studies that had come out of China showing that individuals that were hospitalized had adverse outcomes. They were more likely to have adverse outcomes if they had hypertension, diabetes, and I think from China, the third one was liver disease. So we had access to some of this research in the beginning. And of course, it was from China. So it was like understandable maybe if there wasn't going to be as much action taken. But I was getting into arguments with doctor friends of mine about, they were like, this is an infectious disease. Nutrition has nothing to do with it. And I kept stating like, no, but when it comes to supporting immune health and giving the body the ingredients that it needs to function better, it does. And then we learned that the unique thing about coronavirus is that it very much relates to nutrition from a metabolic health standpoint. So there was then a research study that was published in JAMA I think it was in April, that looked at, I think, 5,000 patients in New York City hospitals, people that had contracted COVID and needed to be hospitalized. And they found that 88% of those people had more than one pre-existing condition, specifically diabetes, hypertension, and obesity were the three that were listed. So even at that point, I feel like it would have made sense to be like, okay, we understand that these conditions that we have, unfortunately, a very unhealthy population to begin with. So how can we promote some more health-related guidelines instead of just adding so much fear down everyone's throat? How can we help people focus on the things that they can do and that are in their own control in order to feel good, improve their immune system, and also improve their metabolic health? And we got nothing until I think June hit, and there had been several other studies that were published to demonstrate that there was a very close correlation between your baseline health and your risk of poor outcomes if you were to contract the virus. And so the CDC updated their website to say, here's the primary conditions that we know put you at the greatest risk. And then they provided recommendations as like bullet points underneath each of those conditions. And the bullet points were like, continue to take your pharmaceutical drug as prescribed by your practitioner. It was essentially the recommendations that they gave. There was very little recognition of nutrition. Actually, there was no recognition of nutrition as far as it relates to metabolic health. And there was just an ongoing messaging around washing your hands and wearing masks and continuing to take your medication. And it's like, but on a separate area of the CDC's website, we see that they state that 80% of chronic diseases like diabetes and hypertension are related to poor lifestyles, specifically nutrition, tobacco use, alcohol, and sedentary lifestyles. And it's like, then on this page of COVID, we're only going to get the, like fearful messaging rather than combining the two to say, how can we create the most optimal health situation for the general public to ensure that when the pandemic is over, we're in the healthiest state possible. And I really fear that right now, that's not the case. We're in a worse state than we started when it comes to people's anxiety levels, their depression, their mental health, and then also, weight gain and or blood sugar regulation.
I know it's been so disheartening just to see and watch all of the gyms close, watch people's stress skyrocket, hear from my clients that they weren't really drinking at home before and now they're drinking at home a lot more, and they're snacking on their kids' snacks, and it's like highly processed, super palatable, hard to say no to foods, and it's it's a normal reaction based on like what happens in the brain when we're eating those type of foods. But can we talk, because I know you're so proactive with your clients, and I know you're I know we're joking that you like started negative, but you're such a positive person and you give people like great tools and realistic tips on like managing these comorbidities. And I mean, I just saw a study that was like on average, people who passed away from COVID, had 2.6 comorbidities. And you're like, we're talking like they didn't just have obesity and diabetes. They also had hypertension on average. It was like higher than 2, closer to 3. And so getting these lifestyle diseases under control, do you have some recommendations when working with clients around diabetes, hypertension, and obesity? Because I want people to walk away from this podcast to be like, this is a functional nutritionist that has worked under Dr. Hyman at the Cleveland Clinic, who's worked with over 4,000, patients in the past and continues to work with people to like take care of these type of disease states. They're lifestyle diseases, right? I mean, we both know it. What is kind of like your hit list of ways to work with people to create health instead of fear?
Yeah. So a lot of the people that I work with have hypertension, prediabetes. Most of them are executives, CEOs of large companies, some Fortune 500 companies that I'm working with to help their executives improve their health. And it's like, I would say that we actually pulled data on this, but it's over 75% that are on a blood pressure reducing medication. So I think also like that there's so much attention that needs to be placed on access to care, but also I think that even larger attention needs to be placed on quality of care, because you could have the best healthcare in the United States where we spend $3.6 trillion a year and be on 3 pharmaceutical drugs and sent on your way as like, here are the recommendations to create health, but it's not actually creating health, it's treating disease, which we can get to. But my recommendations are going to, of course, vary for every person that I work with, just because I'm such a proponent in personalized nutrition. So typically someone that has hypertension, there's really strong research on narrowing the window of eating to time-restricted eating with 14 to 16 hours of fasting overnight. But I also will do cortisol testing on every person to see what their cortisol response is. And if a person is under extremely high amounts of stress and they have really high morning cortisol levels, I'm going to be more like strategic about how to incorporate the shortening windows of eating and maybe supplementing their adrenals to make sure that that we're not creating more issues in certain areas. So, but as a go-to, without knowing something about the individual, I would say that shortening the window of eating seems to be like one of the first things that a person can start to do if you are trying to improve outcomes for diabetes and outcomes for hypertension. The next thing that I would say is a very basic understanding of just eating real foods instead of all of these highly processed foods. And even, I think that the other day I was just talking to someone who was like, oh, I know how to read a label. This is like nutrition 101. And then she's sending me these like Fit Crunch bars and asking me if I think that they're a good idea, and other bars that when you look at when you actually look at the ingredients versus thinking that something's healthy. Like someone else that I was just talking to had said that she was recommending to her husband to maybe not eat so much sugar. And he was like, I don't eat any sugar. And she was like, well, you eat dairy-free ice cream every night. And he was like, but it's dairy-free ice cream. And she was, these are really educated people. And she was like, I know, but look at the added sugar that's in that. So I would say just really paying attention to what you're putting into your body makes such a difference. And it's easy to like skip 1 to 2 times that you're at the grocery store. And those 1 to 2 times that, especially with eating out, can really add up. So I would say those would be key. Also looking at nutrient deficiencies, because certain nutrient deficiencies, most people that have hypertension and high blood pressure, they think that it's just that they need to be following a low sodium diet. And for most people, that's not the case. There's a genetic mutation that will lead to higher salt sensitivity. But for the majority of the population, it's going to be actually increasing potassium intake rather than reducing sodium intake, because the sodium to potassium ratio is going to matter a lot more. So eating more avocados and strawberries and really coming down to those whole foods instead of all of the low sodium, low potassium foods that are highly processed in order to balance out that ratio. And then from a diabetes standpoint, one that I'm looking at regularly is chromium and magnesium specifically, because those are common nutrient deficiencies that we see. And then I think that, some kind of variation of your Fab4 approach is amazing. In my practice, I give people a plate method that I call an optimal plate method that just has half of a plate of non-starchy vegetables as the place to start, because I think that there's, the general recommendations are to have 5 cups of vegetables in your diet each day and 5 cups of fruits and vegetables. Most people will lean heavier on fruits. So adding the 5 cups of non-starchy vegetables specifically, so your potatoes and butternut squash and parsnips don't count in that category. It tends to really not only help increase potassium and magnesium and other nutrients from a micronutrient standpoint, but also the dietary fiber that people really need to help to decrease their cholesterol levels, improve their blood sugar levels, and feed their gut microbiome, because there's really nothing more important than fiber, I really believe.
Preaching to the choir. I dig it. I'm going to go back and ask a couple like detailed questions on narrowing the window of eating for clients with hypertension and diabetes. You're doing that overall to give them a larger fasting window, lower, if they're hyperinsulinemic, lower insulin levels, lower blood sugar levels, give their body a little bit of a break. Do you have a particular window of time that you like best personally?
So I vary it based on every person's schedule, because all of the people that I work with have different schedules, and a lot of them that are still having late night meetings and those kinds of things, especially now that people are traveling again, or at least the people that I'm working with are traveling again. I think that the beauty of it is that you can make it work for whatever schedule you have. So typically I try to have them eat by 10 a.m., but it's not always possible depending on what time they stopped eating the night before. And obviously it will also vary based off of when they're working out, because I find that, that will make a difference, because I try to have people eat within the 30-minute, or at least get a protein source and about 15 grams of carbohydrates after they've worked out to increase the muscle synthesis. But and that can be thrown off sometimes depending on the fasting window. So I think just basing it off of your schedule, and then also changing it on each day that your schedule changes. So the thing that I always say, the people that I work with are super rigid, where they're like, tell me exactly what to do, and I want to do it exactly like you tell me. I work with a lot of men. And so I'm like, the great thing about this is that it can be really flexible.
Yeah.
So if you stop eating at 8 p.m. at night tonight, you can wait until 10 a.m. tomorrow to eat, and then you could do it differently the next day.
Yeah. And they're like, I don't care. I'm just going to do exactly what you say. And all the women are like, but wait, we like flexibility and we're excited about our flexible plan. I know. Less emotional eating from men, an ability to easily fast. But definitely I see that I know you've probably seen the same study, but even research shows that like even a 10-hour feeding window is like beneficial for triglyceride levels, blood sugar levels, all of it.
Yeah. I think I tend to go with 14 hours overnight of fasting and 10-hour window of eating, because the research is really strong in that area. And for some people, I just find they get too hypoglycemic. Of course, this also has to do with their metabolic flexibility. Once they start to decrease their carbohydrate consumption, they're like highly processed carbohydrate consumption. Mm-hmm. But I would say that 14 hours is typically where like the sweet spot is for me with working with people.
I love it. Me too. Can you talk about what metabolic flexibility means?
Yeah. So metabolic flexibility means that sometimes when a person's following a ketogenic diet, for instance, the goal would be to improve their insulin sensitivity, even if they have certain bouts of eating carbohydrates. So sometimes when a person is not metabolically flexible and they're eating a ketogenic diet or a really low carbohydrate diet, and then they have one source of carbohydrates, it throws them out of ketosis and their blood sugar levels increase. So the goal would be for that to not happen. When a person becomes more metabolically flexible, it would mean that you could follow generally a lower carbohydrate diet and then have an occasional source of carbohydrates, an occasional source of sugar, and it wouldn't throw your blood sugar levels off significantly. And you could still, in a lot of cases, maintain a low level of ketosis.
Yeah, I love that. How long do you think on average it takes for someone to become metabolically flexible? Obviously, there's so much bioindividuality here, but have you seen like generalizations in your practice? And do you recommend people take time to dip into ketosis or go low carb or anything like that?
So I think that lower carbohydrate diets are more challenging with women than with men. So typically the lower carbohydrate diets that the men that I work with they do better. And I would say that on average, to achieve metabolic flexibility, I've seen take probably about 3 months or so. And I would say that would be a place that they would get to, that things would improve, but may not improve as dramatically as you would like. So I'm not sure of actually what the research shows on this. I'm not sure if there even is any, but from my own observations, I would say a window of like 3 to 6 months. So all of the one-on-one coaching that I do is 6 months. And then they have a year-long program after that if they want to continue. So I'm not working on like short-term quick fix diets with people. I'm looking at like ongoing labs and trying to really figure out what's best for them in the short term versus the long term, because I feel like when you work with someone for too short of a time, it can lead you to think that this is the way that you have to eat for the rest of your life. And like I just had someone last week that we had diagnosed, well, basically his doctor and I had diagnosed him with SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, where you have bacteria in your small intestine that's supposed to be more of a sterile environment. And he's on a low FODMAP diet, and he had basically like indicated that he was under the impression that this is how he had to eat for the rest of his life. And I'm like, no. This is a 6-week period of time, and we're going to get you like back to eating foods and tolerating them a lot better than you ever did to begin with once we're there. So I think that sometimes people have this lack of understanding around the use of like short-term therapeutic interventions to help to improve the way that the body's functioning, so that then in the long term, you can actually tolerate more foods in your diet. And I feel like this is especially common in people that I see that have even like seen previous functional medicine providers, where they've been like following a low candida diet for the last 2 years, or they're like following their food sensitivity diet for, like a 3-year period of time and have cut out 10 foods. And I'm like, but why are you doing this? And they're like, I thought that's what the person told me to do. And then they never told me for how long. So I thought this is just like what you're supposed to do. And it's like, no. Usually food restriction or elimination diets, removing foods from people's diets help to decrease some of the inflammatory burden that can be happening underneath the surface, so that then you can so that also you can figure out what else is happening underneath the surface, because people mistake food for being the cause of their problems when really it's just exacerbated by food when you have something like SIBO or an underlying condition. So I would say that usually you remove the food, help to improve those underlying conditions so that then a person can tolerate foods without having the food reactions long term.
Until you're working with a functional nutritionist or a functional MD long term, you don't really understand that it is like you're a race car and you're going around the track and you're coming back in for your checkup, change the tires. You might need to change the oil and change a few things, and then you can drive again. And the goal is always to like get you to a place where you're better on the other end of it, not continuing to deprive and restrict. And I think that's the hard part too, when books come out that are very restrictive on lectins or histamines, or, because people automatically assume if they're feeling the symptoms of that book is covering, then this must be them and they need to cut out everything, instead of like sticking with the basics and or doing a short-term like functional intervention, which is just like, that is just like gold nuggets in this podcast right now. Because I know there are people in their cars right now who have been probably following their, high Cyrex or, pick a food sensitivity test, and they have been eating this way for 5 years. Like, I'm allergic to cashews. I was in 2005, and we're like, hey, it's 2020, but
exactly.
But people don't know how to bring it back. Like, it's so important. And so maybe let's, there's so much to unpack here. But I think it's such really just like practical, really good information for people to start to understand. Let's talk about a couple of things. Let's talk about removing foods and how to safely reincorporate foods that may have shown up as a sensitivity, and then what the most common underlying conditions are that you see that may be exacerbating food sensitivities.
Yeah. Okay, great. So I would say that everyone blows off the reintroduction process, and it's the most important. The reason that you would want to try to remove gluten or dairy from your diet is because you would want to see how your body responds when you reintroduce it, unless you have an allergy, like a full-blown celiac disease diagnosis or a dairy allergy or lactose intolerance. But for most people, that's not the case. The majority of the population, I'm not saying that most people tolerate gluten well. I don't actually think that a lot of people tolerate gluten well, but I do think that people confuse sensitivities with allergies. So sensitivity is an IgG or an IgA response to the foods that you're eating. And everyone's familiar with antibodies now because of COVID, but it's a food-based antibody response that happens. And that's what the Cyrex testing is. It's a combination of IgG and IgA food sensitivities. So those change over time, and they change based off of exposure to foods as well. Now, if you have a leaky gut, then it's going to increase the likelihood of you developing more of the antibody triggers, where it will light up like a Christmas tree when you see your results on a test. But if you remove those foods from your diet, then reintroducing them one by one is so, so important. And I use a 4-day rotation reintroduction process, where the people that I work with introduce one new food every 4 days, and then they pay attention to the symptoms that they've developed as a result of introducing those foods. So it's a lot. It can be a little tricky too, like if people don't sleep as well the night before, or they're stressed, like because it's hard to just isolate and put you in a bubble. It's sometimes you have to do that food several times if you really want to be super thorough in your reintroduction. But most people don't. Most people are like, I feel so much better not having these foods in my diet that I want to never eat them again. And then they get into a situation where they're at a party and they really want a piece of cake that has dairy, gluten, and sugar, and they feel horrible, and they have no idea why they feel horrible because they don't know what's causing it, because they never reintroduce the foods with the food reintroduction process. So I use a 4-day reintroduction process where they introduce the new food every other day for So on the first day and on the third day of the reintroduction process, 2 times in that day. And then they pay attention. They have like a form. They fill out any symptoms that they have experienced.
Going back to your 4-day reintroduction, you look at a 4-day reintroduction, that's happening. You start to reintroduce foods one at a time over a 4-day period. After how long on average are these people pulling out these foods?
It depends on the person.
Yeah.
The other thing that's important when you remove foods is getting on the right supplements. Because for instance, if you have a leaky gut and you're removing the foods from your diet, then you need to be on gut lining healing supplements that support the epithelial barrier to make sure that everything is intact. So it's like you have the lining of your intestines that is like a pipe that goes from your mouth to your butthole, and the food is supposed to just like move right through the pipe. But when people have holes in that pipe because they don't have the right nutrients or because of a variety of factors, bacterial overgrowth can also create this, then it won't help you feel better when you reintroduce the foods. So the most important nutrients that help with that are omega-3s, zinc, vitamin A, and L-glutamine and aloe vera and DGL are the combination that I use in working with people to heal that lining. And then we reintroduce the foods and hope that, it depends, like I said, on the person and sometimes also how quickly they feel better. So some people will take a lot longer to feel better. And if I do lab testing on everyone that either I work with one-on-one or that runs through my My Food is Health program. So it helps to better understand where they're at when they start with their labs. If there's a lot of things that are off, then it'll be a longer period of time that they are removing the foods from their diet. I would say a standard 6 weeks is what I typically will recommend as a general recommendation, because the half-life of any food, the half-life of the IgG food response for any food is going to be 3 weeks. So if the half-life is 3 weeks, then 6 weeks is a really safe period of time to know that if you remove the foods for that long, then it would help to reset your immune system.
I love that. 6 weeks as a minimum, but obviously looking at labs and understanding inflammation levels, deficiency levels, things of that nature, and just checking in with them. How are they feeling? I think that that's what's so interesting. And you hit the nail on the head when you said it earlier, is when you're making recommendations to pull out foods, you're doing it as an intervention to see what's going on with someone. But it is pretty common for people to feel amazing and then be like, I never want to go back. And that is okay if you're really never going to go back. But what you're saying is exactly what happens with so many clients. They hit a party, it'd been 6 months, and they're like, ooh, but that piece of pizza is my favorite from my favorite place. And one's not going to be that big of a deal. And then they're the guy or the gal in the bathroom or literally unable to sleep with major acid reflux and all the GI side effects. So
no, exactly. And it happens. It's not very realistic to think that you'll never have those foods again. And usually people need longer periods of time to get to the point of realizing that they really don't do well with the food and that it's not worth having it in their life. And that was my own personal experience. I went into nutrition because I was diagnosed with my own health issues and saw a functional medicine doctor. My parents dragged me to the functional medicine doctor. I actually hated every second of it. And I was like, you guys aren't doctors. We should just listen to the neurologist who wants to just give me medication for these things.
Yeah.
But I had done an elimination diet when I was 15 based off of my own testing. And I reintroduced most of the foods back into my diet, all the foods back into my diet. But gluten was the one that was so hard for me every time. But at the same time, I was a teenager. So after I did the full elimination diet, my friends and I were planning a party of the foods that we were going to eat together, the Oreos, the ramen noodles and everything. It took me enough times of essentially betraying myself. I knew that gluten was a problem and that I feel absolutely horrible. And it triggers these mini seizures basically that I have neurologically. They're called cataplexies. But every time it was so hard for me until I got to the point that I ate it so not often, but like once every 3 months or, once in a while, that I was like, this is awful. I never want to do this to myself again. I just have to never have this food again. And it wasn't until I got to that point, it was like my breaking point, that my health got so much better. But that took me years after the first elimination diet that I did in order to get to the point that I'm like, this has to be a non-negotiable for me. I feel better. And this is like a form of self-care to remove this food fully from my diet.
I love that. It is a form of self-care because the side effects you're experiencing were keeping you from your most vibrant self. And
exactly.
that like fulfilling, vibrant life, like you're dealing, whether you're doing it to get along with your friends or just for that like immediate pleasure, the pain after was not worth it for you. And I think it does take years for a lot of people. It does take multiple doctors a lot of times, or multiple tests and to kind of uncover those things that are non-negotiable for people but can really change their life. I want you to tell your story of how you became so interested in nutrition and your personal diagnosis. But before we get there, I want to see if you could explain the most common underlying conditions that you see. Because you obviously talked about an elimination diet being at a minimum 6 weeks, because we're looking at that 3-week half-life too, depending on what blood tests look like. It could be a lot longer, or it could be something that people just try to bring back and it doesn't work and they pull it out for good. But I love that you're touching on reintroduction. I love that you're, not creating a space where people are going to be afraid of these foods, never eat these foods again, but we're bringing to light the fact that like you may not have these food allergies forever, but if you're not doing the work to realign your gut and to really, really heal the gut lining and that lumen, that you may be dealing with this for a very long time. So if everyone listening can just take a deep breath and realize, like, if you've had a food sensitivity test, like most of us have, one, it's like, it totally depends on the test, right? Two, and we're going to go into that too. God, there's so many things we could talk about. Like we could just do like a weekly call. But reintroduction is so important. Healing the gut lining is so important. Getting those before and after labs, so important. But it doesn't have to be your forever unless you decide, I've done this a couple of times, this isn't working for me, it needs to be my forever. So not demonizing food is super important to me. And I know you've done that. So most common underlying conditions, you mentioned SIBO, you mentioned dysbiosis or overgrowth of bacteria. Is there anything else specific that you think causes major, gut leaky gut or permeability?
Yeah. So before I get into that, I just want to say too that when I say elimination diet, there's a lot of variations of different elimination diets, and each person that I work with, I recommend different foods to eliminate from their diet. So it's just the idea of generally eliminating a specific type of food that you're trying to see if you have a sensitivity to, based off of testing, or, if you have SIBO testing, then we would, decrease the FODMAPs in your diet, those kinds of things. So I don't have like a standard elimination diet protocol. I think that's important. And I don't remove every gluten and dairy from every person's diet that I work with. So as far as underlying conditions, SIBO and Candida are probably two of the most common that I see. And then I would also say environmental. So a lot of the men that I work with, especially, they have high mercury levels. It's just something that I see over. I didn't see this at the Cleveland Clinic when we were working with the same labs, but now that I'm working on my own, I see it in pretty much all these men that are traveling, eating out a lot, eating sushi a lot. And I think that it's likely a combination of environmental exposure and also high mercury diets from the high mercury fish that can be consumed in, like fancier situations. Yeah. Bougie sushi. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that, and then I also have been paying attention. I pay attention to people's exposure to mold, because I find that if you go through a thorough history for a person, that a lot of times, one of the ways that I try to identify this is just going through a timeline, like standard functional medicine 101 of like okay, tell me about where you C-section or vaginal birth, where you bottle fed or breastfed, and then going through the instances in their life where they really can remember feeling horrible, and then going backwards 2 years to be like, okay, what happened in that 2-year window before you had that like diagnosis, and it seems like everything just randomly happened out of nowhere, and then you're like, oh, that wasn't actually random. I lived in a moldy apartment. I was working a high stress job. I was put on birth control. I was put on an antibiotic because I had this weird infection. And then you see that for the whole year prior to that, there's all these random things that happens that have the potential to really throw a person out of balance. So I would say bacterial overgrowth, fungal overgrowth, mercury and other heavy metals, and then mold exposure are probably the four most common that I really pay attention to.
I love it. And for everyone listening, what are the standard tests you're using to diagnose SIBO, candida, mercury and heavy metal exposure, and mold?
Yeah. So for the SIBO test, usually I'll do a Genova GI-FX. That's a stool test that looks at large intestine bacterial overgrowth. So that's more of a dysbiosis situation. And there's a difference between SIBO and dysbiosis. You could have zero bacterial overgrowth in your small intestine, but still have dysbiosis in your large intestine. So I think it's an important differentiation. But I'll do a GI-FX to start if a person's having like a lot of GI symptoms. And then if it comes back with certain elevations, then I'll refer them to, for a lot of the people I've actually gotten to know their doctors, and now their doctors refer other people to me. So it's helpful. I can just show them the results and then they order a SIBO breath test because the breath test is obviously the gold standard. So that's what we'll do for SIBO. For candida overgrowth, I use a Nutraval test, or I've been using since COVID the metabolic metabolomics, which is Genova's new test that is just urine. You don't have to do blood with it. And so they're still looking at the arabinose level that is kind of like the best indicator of whether you have candida overgrowth. And
I'm going to stop you because I want you to explain what that is for people, a marker in your urine.
Yeah. So the arabinose and the citra, there's one other marker, arabinose and the other, that becomes elevated when a person has higher levels of yeast in their system, essentially. So the GI-FX, the Nutraval, and then the Nutraval also, if you get it done with blood, it will show high mercury levels. But that isn't necessarily diagnostic of mercury toxicity, because it's just short-term exposure to mercury. It could be because you had, like sushi within the week before you did the test. So then if that comes back really elevated, we'll work on decreasing their sources of mercury, going through like their dental amalgams and just like better understanding their history. And then we'll decrease it or cut it out of their diet, any high mercury sources of food, and put them on some supplements that help to support overall detoxification. And then I'll refer them, and then we'll repeat the test. If they're still high in mercury, then I'll refer them to a doctor that can do a full 24-hour urinary toxic elements test that you usually, it could be provoked or unprovoked. Provoked means that you would take a certain pill called DMSA that helps to increase the excretion of, I love how you're just smiling at all of this.
Well, because I'm waiting, because I think that's yes, I'm just you're just making it so clear for people, but I'm also nodding my head because of the layers in which you look at your patients without automatically saying okay, let's go do a 24-hour urine toxicity test. And a lot of times people get on Yelp and they're like, heavy metals. And then it's like a practitioner that does a provoked heavy metal test that maybe is giving a higher dose to provoke a higher mercury toxicity load. And then they make a bunch of money on chelations, IV chelations.
Practitioners lost their license for doing that. It's very, very controversial.
Because if you think about it, you're like
everything that we're talking about is controversial. If we were to have my best friend sitting here that's a resident in surgery at the Cleveland Clinic who's like, I don't understand anything that you do.
Yeah. Well, those 19 hours of nutrition that you probably got in 14 years.
We were roommates when she was going through medical school, and she would like bring home her 20 hours worth of nutrition lectures, and we would just like die laughing at the industry sponsored messaging that's included in the 20 hours of nutrition training that they get. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's hard.
So the DMSA, you could do provoked or non-provoked, and do that for the urinary toxic elements test. And then for the mycotoxin test is what I'll use for it. Mold testing is like very unclear. Honestly, there's just so much controversy around it. So I'll use Great Plains has a mycotoxin urinary test that's pretty much like the best that exists. But sometimes it's like most important to go off of your history, living in a moldy environment, feeling like your health never felt the same after you lived in that specific building or worked in that specific building, and then incorporating, some kind of mold treatment in order to help people feel better. And honestly, like testing for mold in a person's house can sometimes be more effective than all of the controversy around the mold testing in the physical body.
What do you think is the best way to test for mold toxicity in someone's home? If they were like, do I have mold in my home? How do I test for that?
So I usually refer to these two mold specialists, but I don't know the exact.
You don't think they'll fly to California for me? I'm just kidding.
No, but even actually like one of them it's hard with mold because of course, a lot of times you can't visibly see it. But I had one of the people that I used to work with at the Cleveland Clinic, I was just texting her last week, and she said that they had the mold specialist that we all refer to for the people that we work with. And she had him out to her house. He said that everything was fine. Her husband had developed SIBO in the time that they were living in their house. She had developed basically essentially celiac disease, but it wasn't confirmed through biopsy. They were just having all these health issues since the time that they moved there. So we started poking holes in their ceiling, and she said that they found their ceiling covered from corner to corner of just pure mold, even though the mold specialist had said that their house was fine. So I'm not an expert in that field.
Yeah. But it's something to be aware of. It's a neurotoxin for people. It totally breaks down your immune system, and it can come with a load of health issues.
Yeah, it really can. And it's really hard there's not really any studies that are being done in conventional medicine. I feel like, doctors and other conventional medicine specialists are becoming more on board with the fact that nutrition actually plays a role in a person's health, which I know to people that follow me will think that it's crazy when I make statements like that. And they're like, well, yeah, of course it does. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. There's so much controversy around some of these things when you compare standard medical training and the way that the system, teaches practitioners. So when you get to mold, it's an even more obscure topic that's seems very quackery kind of ways of practicing.
Yeah. I mean, well, you took those 20 hours of nutrition and 14 years of school. And then you said, oh, by the way, we just learned that there's something called a microbiome in the gut. And there's bacteria and there's fungus there. And by the way, it has byproducts. When you eat fiber, it gives off short chain fatty acids that are actually fuel for your body. And you're going to just add that on top of the fact that there are also things that affect your health, like heavy metals and mold and your personal stress. And it can be completely overwhelming. It would take someone way longer than 14 years to be prepared to really treat people. And that's why I think the circle of care is so important. You're saying you're getting to know your clients, doctors, that's what you need. You need a team of people. If you really want to go for a functional medicine approach, you need a team of people. I think that's why Parsley Health is one of those types of places. And when you worked at the Cleveland Clinic, you were obviously the dietitian there working with functional MDs, but people who are really passionate about their specific role, but being able to look at the whole picture and work with other practitioners, doctors, acupuncturists. I'm open to all of the practitioners that someone wants to work with, but I think it really starts with nutrition because you can prevent so many of, I don't know, like the lifestyle diseases and the breakdown, and just understanding, like, from a functional approach, what's the root cause?
Yeah. Well, and it's like you can prevent disease, but then at the same time, for a person that doesn't have disease, you can actually like create health. And I feel like in medicine, people don't realize that the medical system is set up to treat disease, that it's not really designed to create health. And the first time that I like heard of this concept was from Dr. Hyman. When we started the Cleveland Clinic Center for Functional Medicine, we were having like different lectures to have the other healthcare practitioners come learn about functional medicine, meet Dr. Hyman. And I remember standing in the back of the like auditorium and Dr. Hyman being like, when you create health as a side effect, disease goes away. And I remember being like, is he allowed to say that here? Like it sounds, when you're at such an academic place, like to a general person that seems like, yeah, that would make sense. But when you're just like in academia, it's very different. And statements like that are not taken seriously sometimes, but there's nothing more true than it. And I've realized that now after working with so many people, is that it's like you have to focus on creating health. And then as a side effect, disease can be mitigated or improved. But people think they're like taught that being healthy means going on a diet and losing weight. And then separately creating health means seeing your doctor to like manage everything else that's happening. And it's like use food as a weight loss tool and then use medication and medical management for your health. And we've outsourced our health to medicine in the diet industry and the processed food industry, and then in turn the pharmaceutical industry, because when you're eating all these processed foods and feeling horrible, then you end up needing the diet industry because you feel so bad about yourself. So then you like go in the opposite direction, and then they keep each other in business because you can't stay on these diets long term. And then they keep the pharmaceutical industry in business because you need the pharmaceuticals to mask it. And so we're living in a world where most people don't really know how to create health. I think that there's more of an understanding around preventing disease, but there's not as much of an emphasis on creating health. Like, how can we get you having daily bowel movements? How can we help ensure that your energy levels are as great as possible? How can we ensure that like your skin is vibrant and beautiful? Like all of these things that are just completely missed. And like you're saying, I mean, food has the ability to change your physiology. We know that it has the ability to modulate your inflammatory pathways and the microbiome in a way that can prevent disease, but it also has the ability to create health and make you actually feel good in your life. And I feel like preventing disease is just like one small, I mean, it's a big part of the equation, but like creating health, it's like this whole field. If we were looking at like a pie chart, this whole field that's basically like going empty and missed with not helping people understand the difference.
I love that so much because it's true. It's the side effect of creating health is mitigating disease. What are your tips for creating health? Where do you think people need to be looking at when they look at their life and they go, Brigid, I am so motivated by this. Let's do it. Let's create health. Because I think a lot of people don't even realize that they don't feel well.
They don't.
And that they are exhausted and that they're overworked and their adrenals are just working on overdrive and they're just a go-getter type A. I'm used to this. This is my life. And they just really don't know what it feels like to feel vibrant and they don't even know how to start to create health. What advice would you have for someone just coming to build a relationship with wellness? How do you create health?
Yeah.
It's a big pie chart, right?
That is one big pie chart. So I think that the first important thing is to, if you're just starting, to remember that nutrition is a practice. And instead, it's like the diet industry takes people from 0 to 100 so quick. And it's like, here's the list of everything to eat. And it sets people up for so much failure because it's not just building incrementally on a person's habits and choices. So I would say that it's just an ongoing practice that you're going to choose to show up every day and try to get a little bit better. I always compare it to someone like LeBron James, obviously, since I'm from Cleveland, that he didn't get good at basketball overnight. And even though he's the best, arguably the best current basketball player that we have in the NBA, he still misses baskets. He still like makes mistakes. And I think that the same is true with people's diet. Not that it even should be viewed as a mistake or a cheat meal, but just it will never look perfect. And so I think that that's probably an important thing to start with. But, and actually also the idea that whoever you're taking nutrition advice from, like try not to put their diet on a pedestal, because I can't tell you the number of questions that I get with people that have this perception around like me eating this like very specific way that's so different than the rest of the world. And it just doesn't exist. You know, like you and I, the way that we eat is not too off track from the way that, I mean, maybe from the way that the standard American diet is, but I think that sometimes it could be dangerous to put other people on pedestals when it comes to nutrition.
Oh, I completely agree with that. I think when you think about nutrition, like you think it's your religion. Like I think people are born into a specific religion or they believe a specific thing. And I get really worried about when people take their diet beliefs to a certain like level, whether they're like carnivore and they started feeling better, or they're vegan, or they're like raw vegan, or they've gone to like these extreme eliminations, and or they're following someone, they want to know exactly how they eat. It's like you stop asking yourself how you feel when you eat those foods.
Yes, 100%.
And like it's crazy. I mean, I was actually talking to someone earlier today and they were like, you know, how did you create the Fab Four? And I'm like, I just looked at like, what does science tell me that we need? And I was very clear. I'm like, there is no essential need for fiber and leafy greens or phytochemicals. Do I see how it's beneficial to the gut microbiome and like genetic pathways and like all of these amazing things? Yes. But like, if I have a client who has major SIBO and has like a dysbiosis and a horrible response to having seeds or fiber or even like starchy, non-starchy, cruciferous vegetables in their diet, I'm not like, well, it's still the best thing that you can be eating. It's like, this obviously isn't working for you. And let's, you know, this is not the Bible. I did not create a religion. This is not something that like if this is not working for you, this is just like, these are tools. Everything should be a tool in your toolbox. And like, you need to continue to educate yourself and like learn from people who we're all constantly learning. I think that's important too. If people are good at their job, they're constantly editing and reiterating and learning and saying like, hey, I said this once before. New research suggests this. I'm kind of trying this with clients now and being open with that. That's where I find trust in practitioners and other, nutritionists, RDs, functional MDs. It's like just that open, honest flow of conversation and just sharing from the research that you're reading and how you're helping your clients in your practice.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's basically, I think that Fab Four is like an amazing, like you present it as, it's an amazing loose or light structure that like can be personalized in the way that you need it to be personalized. And I mean, you're basically speaking to like personalized nutrition, that there, like people get so caught up in the labels of different ways of eating and they miss the importance of biochemical individuality, which is the idea that you have your own unique blueprint. And when you think of the fact that there's 100 trillion microbes that are living inside of your gut microbiome, just thinking about the different variations of patterns that exist among each and every one of us, that alone tells you that like you're not going to respond the same way to your diet as to the same diet as like your best friend will, you know? And then you add the layers of, you know, your genetic predisposition and your immune cells and your neurotransmitters and your hormones and all of these things that get so complex that you see that, oh, this is why I shouldn't probably just, you know, blindly trust that this diet is going to be so great for everyone. That it really, I mean, if I could get like I don't have any tattoos, but if I could get 2 tattoos on my body, it would be like personalized nutrition and food is medicine, or like food is health, because those are like the staples that people need to take away instead of the idea that like paleo is better than vegan.
Yeah. Such good stuff right there, because what you're doing is you're freeing people. Like, I think that's, we all get caught up in the mindset of like, well, this is better than that. And that's how I'm sure you get this question. People simplify it to like, well, is brown rice better than white rice? And I'm always just like, well, let's look at what they are and like what you're going to get with brown rice and what you're going to get with white rice. Make it easier digestibility. But then with brown rice, you might have an issue with heavy metal exposure. And then you may have a harder time it may last. It's like, it's apples to oranges. Like, and everything people will just want to know, is this better for me or worse for me? Just tell me what to eat. And it's like, if we could just get everyone to start thinking about themselves as an individual and like asking themselves what they like to eat, what agrees with them, and then creating their own diet, their own lifestyle. I think and that's what you're doing. And I'm so proud of you.
I'm so proud of you too. But if you're working with someone or like following a diet, I mean, this is just making me think of, I'm not sure if you saw it in the media recently, or like if we're edit this out if you don't want to include it, but the Teddy Mellencamp story about her all-in diet and the F Factor diet. I read about the F Factor in the New York Times. I don't really know much about either of them, but it seems like it's like, this is how you do it. And here's your 1,000 calories that you eat per day, although allegedly they don't provide caloric recommendations. But if you're following a diet plan that has the same recommendations for every single person and doesn't account for the individual variability and makes claims that it does these things for every person, then it's probably the person that you're working with probably doesn't know very much about nutrition and probably hasn't had very much experience working one-on-one with individuals. And if they have worked one-on-one with individuals, then they're not paying attention to the variability that happens when you put the same person on the same plan and the different outcomes that happen as a result.
I 100% agree with you. I actually, being a mom of a toddler and entrepreneur and having a practice, I was a little bit under a rock when it came to all this stuff. And someone had brought something up in comments, like, can you release your protein powder certificate of analysis? And I was like, absolutely. Like, I'm so stoked on it. It's literally like anyone could knock my stuff off because it's literally, there's nothing in there. And here's my certificate of analysis, like, happy to share. And they're like, with all the stuff in the media, and like, I was like, oh geez, like, you're talking to a mom who's living under a rock when it comes to like what some other people in my industry are doing. And I had someone send me like some background. Yeah, I had someone send me like some discussion and some Instagram story that I needed to go take a look at or whatever. And it's just, I feel bad. I'm sure intentions were all good in the beginning, but when you do get down a rabbit hole of like selling products or, and that's the slippery slope, is like, okay, you start to sell products and you're like, this is what works for me. I still have clients who are vegan and vegetarian who are never going to have a beef isolate as their protein powder. And then maybe that doesn't work for them, or, monk fruit never worked, or they have a cacao issue. And like, there is just, you have to account for, is it working for you? And like, if something isn't working for you, and that you have to not eat that way. And I think exactly what you're saying is like, sometimes things can take on legs of their own. And then it's just a lot easier to work with a lot of people with a totally planned out program. Like, this is how you eliminate. These are exactly the foods that you eliminate. This is how you bring them in. This is your road to health. This is everybody's road to health. And it's true. Like, the more general and vague and simplified recommendations you give to the general public, it allows for them to really uncover what's going on for them personally, instead of just taking blanket statements as truth for everyone, which is it just isn't safe.
It's not safe, and it's not good for people's mental health and well-being, like their emotional health and well-being. And I think that there's a lot of people that struggle with just like so much shame around food and so many food rules and restrictions, and that, like you said, it doesn't lead people to feel very free. And it actually, again, goes back to just us outsourcing our health to the diet industry and to the processed food industry and the medical management system of disease and medical management system of health, when it's like, listen maybe more to your own signs and symptoms that are happening in your body versus making that expert opinion more valuable than your own experience that you've had. Because I think that this is where some people can feel really not heard in general medicine when they're telling, whatever practitioner that they're working with, like, no, but this medication I didn't respond well to, this diet I didn't respond well to. And it's like up to the practitioner to listen and believe you if you're saying that it doesn't work well, and I think that so many people have been taught that like, no, you're wrong. You don't have a medical degree. You don't have a medical background. So you must not know what you're talking about. And a lot of times it's about just like truly listening to your own body and how it's responding to things.
Yeah. And you did that personally. Let's go back to your story. Let's talk about how you found or were dragged into health by your parents. And I think what you've created from your diagnosis is absolutely beautiful. But I'd love to know your personal story.
Okay, yeah. So when I was 15, I was diagnosed with narcolepsy and cataplexy. So at the time, they said that it was a genetic neurological disease where you can't control when you fall asleep and when you stay awake. And it also really impacts sleep because people can't control when they stay awake during the day because they can't fall into a solid state of REM sleep and stay in REM sleep for long periods of time. So, and then I was having cataplexies that are these mini seizures. So they said at the time that it was a genetic neurological disease. Now what we've since found out, last year there was a study that confirmed that it's an autoimmune version of a neurological disease that I sent. My doctor was the head of the sleep disorder center, and I sent her the research paper, and I was like, this is why it makes sense that food impacts people that have this. But so at first I saw a physician at the Cleveland Clinic who was very much against the idea that nutrition had anything to do with the condition, said that there was no research on it, didn't want to hear anything about my parents dragging me to this holistic/functional medicine doctor. And we were so excited to tell him about some of the progress that I had made when I came back for the second appointment, and he basically just turned his back on us the whole appointment and was just typing in the chart, turns around and is like, nutrition has nothing to do with it. There's no research to show that there's a correlation, and then refused to actually continue seeing me. So he was the only pediatric neurologist in the department at the time. So I then started seeing an adult neurologist because he was so upset that my parents were they just kept saying, we feel like it's right to do everything in our control and optimizing every area of her health. We're not trying to say we know anything about science, but we just from a common sense standpoint feel like this is the right approach for our family to pursue. So he was very much upset with that and referred me to someone else. So then it really has helped just, with changing my diet and my supplements and incorporating various things that I have over the years has helped so much in improving my functionality. When I was first diagnosed, I was sleeping at every second of the day. And if I wasn't sleeping, I had about 20 to 30 mini cataplexies a day where I would lose control of my eyes and they would roll to the back of my head. It was only for 10 seconds every time. So it wasn't anything extreme, but I would sometimes fall if I was standing I never was injured or anything, but those kinds of things. And so my ability to function day to day just continued to improve. And also, I would say I still take a form of the medication for narcolepsy, although the seizures I've been able to control purely through my diet, but I still take a small dose of medication 4 days per week. And I feel like through my dietary changes, and I've talked to a few doctors about this, that it's improved my sensitivity to the pharmaceutical intervention. And I've seen this happen time and time again where people are not responsive to the pharmaceutical intervention and then they improve their diet and then their hemoglobin A1Cs go from non-responsive to the medication to dropping within 2 weeks of changing their diet after years of the endocrinologist not being able to help to lower the A1C even with medicine. So I also think that it's important to identify that sometimes when you are approaching health with just changing your lifestyle, that there could be some shame and stigma around taking medication. And that's something that I've really personally had to work through. But I'm also very proud to say that the approaches that I've used have really helped to improve my overall quality of life. So much so that the last year I was asked to speak at the National Sleep Disorder Conference, where I spoke to a room filled with about 300 neurologists and PAs to talk about the role that food plays on narcolepsy specifically, and the importance of listening to the patient's story when they're telling you that these things have worked for them, because even though there's not enough evidence, scientific evidence to show a correlation, doesn't mean that there's not a real life correlation that exists. And I think that, that's a really important concept that I've just personally understood and now can really relate to everyone that I work with who kind of is like struggling with the same thing.
I do feel like people bucket themselves into natural, holistic, functional foods and all of this, and they totally discredit the pharmaceutical industry completely. But it can be really synergistic if you're looking at the whole picture. And for some people, like whether it's metformin or for you, like anti-seizure or anti-narcoleptic medications, right? I mean, I'm like, anti-narcoleptic? How?
It's a stimulant. You can just categorize it as
okay. Stimulant. Something like that supports you, but you've seen yourself control all your seizures through food. Like, that's huge. That's huge. And they're working together for you to have this amazing.
And I think that it highlights using food as the first line of intervention. Like I'm always trying to advocate for food as the first line of intervention, because it's like, do the things that improve how your body is functioning, like your actual physiology. And then when you need a pharmaceutical drug or you need a surgery or you need like conventional medicine, this is a great place to live to seek out the best quality of care that we have access to. And people that dedicate their entire lives to being specialists in those surgeries or in those treatments. And so it's not to discredit that or take away from it. It's just to say that we need food as the first line of intervention to probably lessen the use of the pharmaceuticals, and an area of helping people understand how to create health so they are less dependent on a medical management approach to it.
Totally. I love that. Well, being that food is your first line of defense and the first place you go with everyone to create health, we're going to take it light for the last question of today's podcast. I've absolutely just geeked out, loved every minute of this podcast. I feel like I should be a cheerleader. I think I was a cheerleader for 1 year not in high school and junior high, but I feel like I should have pom-poms on the other side of this Zoom call, like just cheering you on, like 8 clap over here.
No, Kelly, I just said to someone a few weeks ago that works with me that when I sent you my most recent email a few months ago, that I was like, I think I'm just going to print off Kelly's email because she is so supportive. She's such a cheerleader. Like you just are. I love how you really do. You cheer everyone on around you. And I think that's why everyone loves you.
Oh, I just feel like there's enough space for all of us. And it's just like way more fun to be like, yeah, let's do it. Like, I don't know, change the world. But, and we all have our specialties too. Like if someone's sitting there being like, I am the best of this in this space, it's like, everyone has a different experience. Like I may totally geek on blood sugar and that might be my jam, but I may not know very much at all about narcolepsy, And so it's like, there's going to be people, but there's going to be people out there that do like you who really help someone and like who've had this amazing experience at the Cleveland Clinic and really just been able to see a multitude of diagnoses and see different ways of treating each one of those people very individually. And I think that's really important too, like a really priceless experience to go out on your own. And one of the reasons why they're like my first line of defense when I'm like, yeah, my practice is full. But let's go light for the end, because I do think that food is medicine and, your health is your wealth. So what are some of your favorite things to see people eating, for health? And, I guess we'll do the technical one first. What are some of like the biggest deficiencies that you look for, or the biggest deficiencies you see and that cause the biggest issues? And then what are some of your favorite foods to create health?
Yeah. Okay. So, vitamin D, I think, is on everyone's minds right now with all of the research that's been coming out about vitamin D deficiency and worsening COVID outcomes. pretty strong research that's actually been coming out for 6 months, but is now like really being recognized on a national level, which is, I mean, I don't know if you consider Dr. Fauci's interview with Jennifer Gardner a national level, but it seems like it's appropriate. So vitamin D, I would say, is extremely common for people to be very low in. And so that would be the first one. And I don't believe that most people can get adequate levels of vitamin D through food alone, at least from what I've seen. So I'll typically recommend you can get it through things like canned salmon, especially canned salmon, canned sardines that will have some of the bones still intact and ground up a little. That I would recommend. Some mushrooms will have higher sources of vitamin D, some fortified foods, but I try to steer clear of fortification as much as possible, and tend to just incorporate, whole food based sources. So those would be the primary ones. You can get vitamin D depending on where you live, and how close the UVB exposure that you actually have will determine how much your skin is actually able to convert the vitamin D into the active form of vitamin D that you need. So I would say that the best thing a person could do is get their vitamin D levels checked, incorporate some of those food sources. Eggs also would have some vitamin D, and then get on a supplement if you need it. And I usually will recommend vitamin D3. And if you're getting tested, you want to test 24-hydroxy vitamin D. That's what you would ask your doctor for. And then I typically will recommend a range of vitamin D levels for like actual optimal vitamin D that would be closer to like 50 to 70, where the lower end of optimal the lower end of the normal range is 30, but I recommend closer to 40. You don't want to go above 80 because vitamin D is actually a hormone. It's a fat-soluble nutrient or vitamin, but it also is a hormone. So I do think that there could be risks with going too high with vitamin D. So that with just like the strong immune modulating properties that it has, but it's also been shown to be associated with lower risk of certain cancers and multiple sclerosis and various autoimmune diseases. So I would say that vitamin D would be very common. Osteoporosis, fractures, just so many things. And then supplementing with vitamin D3 and K2, I recommend a combination of the two, as long as you're not on a blood thinning drug. This all comes down to like personalizing it with the person that you're working with. Then I would say that the other one that I'll look for is magnesium as the second most common nutrient that most people are deficient in. And it's hard to get, even though when you're looking at the actual magnesium charts of how much each individual food has of magnesium, because of our farming practices, it's really decreased the soil quality and in turn the food levels of magnesium. So even if you're looking at a chart of how to get enough magnesium in your diet, just based on the actual like testing that I've done, it seems like it's difficult to get magnesium from food alone. I'm not saying it's impossible, but people also, if you're working out more, if you have higher stress levels, like all of those things will increase your magnesium needs. So there's a variety of foods that you can get them from. You can get them from leafy greens. You can get them from lentils. You can get magnesium through various nuts. But then I usually will also recommend magnesium glycinate for supplementation, or magnesium citrate, depending on if a person has constipation or regular bowels.
Got it. Love it. I think you've already named two that I think that I take daily and are in my basics. So I love it.
Amazing. all those prenatal supplements that you're taking.
No, I mean, I have my prenatal, I have my vitamin D, I take magnesium at night, I take my omegas. I'm pretty simple, even outside of pregnancy, but it really just comes down to like the biggest bang for my buck, I feel like. Yeah. And for my clients too, based on blood tests. Okay. So just some of your favorite foods in general. It doesn't have to be deficiency based, but some of the ways that you take care of yourself and you think are delicious and nutritious.
Okay, so I try, my number one priority usually in my meals is to add as much color as I can. So because of the color driving so much of the phytonutrients that you get that help to decrease oxidative stress. And I actually think it's such a fun way to just integrate nutrition into food, and something that like moms can do with their kids to help that, like get them. I'm sure you do this with Bash.
Yeah. We go through, we learn colors with our plate.
Do you?
And produce. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
Him saying bok choy is my favorite thing in the whole world.
Oh my gosh, that's so cute.
It's like, I mean, everything's a learning opportunity with a toddler, but I dig that. And it's so easy because it's not easy. People would be surprised how hard it is to add color to your plate, but it is a great trigger when you're grocery shopping and you look in your cart and you're like, all right, I have celery, cucumber, asparagus, and Brussels sprouts. They're all the same color, green. And
I know green is so common.
So like, how do I get white or red or whatever?
Red is the hardest, I think, for people. The like red or the blue purple category is typically the hardest for people. But
like a red cabbage or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Or blueberries, I guess you could do too. So I would say that I try to just like add in certain ways to just enhance things that I'm doing. Like I love fresh ginger root in my smoothies. I do that anytime that I'm making a smoothie because of the antioxidant support that ginger has, and also just because of I love the taste. I add broccoli sprouts to a lot of things because that's also just like a quick and easy add. And I really like adding matcha to things that I'm either like making. If you add just a small amount, it's like easier to not taste because it has more of that earthy, grassy taste. I drink matcha most mornings, but because I actually like really recommend, even for a lot of the clients that I work with that have high cortisol and high stress, to switch to matcha, not to eliminate caffeine, but to switch to matcha to integrate that L-theanine. So matcha, ginger root, broccoli sprouts, blueberries. I also love Kite Hill almond yogurt, the Greek almond yogurt that's unsweetened, just to be super specific.
No, you got to be specific. People are coming home with the sugar if you're not.
It's true. And then for anyone that has a nut allergy, I actually just tried their Blissful. Have you had their Blissful coconut?
Their new coconut one. Yeah? I haven't had it yet.
Okay. So just last week I got it and I was like dipping as kind of like a post-dinner dessert. I was dipping blueberries in the coconut yogurt that's unsweetened, but it tastes like, because of the coconut, it has this like sweet taste that's really delicious. And it reminds me of when we were in high school and my friend's mom would buy like the whipped cream variation kind of that we would dip strawberries into and fill the entire
like
carton at the time.
Cool Whip or something. Yeah.
No, it was a marshmallow. It was a marshmallow dip. It was so good.
There you go.
Anyways, those I really love. I eat siete wraps all the time for a quick lunch that I just throw like either eggs on or organic turkey deli or canned salmon or canned sardines that I'll just mash with some avocado mayo and then add to my siete wrap and then throw some broccoli sprouts and just like a little leafy greens, but I don't really like a lot of leafy greens on my actual on my lunch wrap that I have some days.
See, there's a perfect example of a functional dietitian who is being totally honest with what she's willing to eat and what she likes, and you're eating what you like. I think that right there is. I mean, she ate marshmallow dip in high school, and she's not putting leafy greens on her lunch wrap because she doesn't really love it. And I think that is like. It's always good to reintroduce. It's always good to try again. But like, if it just doesn't jive with you, like there are so many other ways for you to eat leafy greens in your day.
No, it's so true. Yeah. Like I would way rather have them on the side than have them on the actual wrap.
Yeah.
I can do broccoli sprouts on the wrap, but for some reason, leafy greens, I'm like, I just like a small amount of.
Yeah, all good, sis.
I'm obsessed with the Primal Kitchen buffalo sauce that I think should be coming out soon. Have you had that?
I had just had that. It's so good.
It's so good.
But these are the kind of things when you find that coconut yogurt, when you find that buffalo sauce and you're like, hey, you don't have to have the sugar, the fillers, the industrial seed oils. You don't have to have the gluten. You don't have to have the dairy. If you don't need it, like there are just so many ways for us to just elevate. It's not like you don't have to change your whole life. It's just like, what can you elevate to really enjoy your food? And then if you're eating a bunch of cauliflower because it tastes like buffalo, you're like, give me more of this stuff.
No, it's true. But I also think that it's like such a testament to the importance of voting with your fork, because 5 years ago, these foods did not exist. You know, there's like a whole new market that's booming that I think 5 years ago. Yeah. I mean, well, around 5 years ago was when like things were really starting to be created. But I would say, I mean, like when I went gluten-free almost 15 years ago, there was like there was Mary's Gone Crackers and Bob's Red Mill were the two companies that existed and like got me through life. Yeah, totally. But now they're like, people see a need. People are like, oh, our food is making us sick. People are sick of feeling horrible. And when I've been in meetings with people that are like, you know, large, people that have run larger commercial processed food companies that are like, oh, but people they won't buy those. So, you know, we have to sell the Stouffer's. And it's like, but you don't, like, you do not need to. You have created that lie to help you sleep at night, because that is not what people want. And you're seeing it because now these expensive products like Siete wraps that are not cheap, that like everyone that I work with is like, I'm willing to spend a few extra dollars on these wraps because they taste good and I love that they make me feel good and that the ingredients are great. It's like, I just think that for so long there was this lie that the processed food industry was trying to sell, that like this is the only thing that people are buying. And it's like, that's not true.
Honestly, I mean, I just was in conversations with a company to do box delivered smoothies. And it was like, I just feel like you can lower the sugar content here. I really feel like even though it's like fresh fruit and everything, we can lower the sugar content here. You could up the fiber content here. You could create really delicious smoothies, and you could like bring in collagen, or you could have like, people could pick their own and like know to do it. But it was like, it died in R&D, and it died in R&D, that accessibility to people, because they're just like, it's just not sweet enough. It's not going to sell. And I'm like, you are a health company delivering boxes of frozen smoothies to people. And you are telling me that you're delivering health, and I'm telling you there's a better way to do it. And you're saying no. And it's just like, I'm not going to budge. Like, I'm not going to sit down and say like 28 grams of sugar, even though it's just coming from pineapple, is good for you.
Oh my gosh, I know. Yeah, 100%. And the other thing that's like so important is what you just said about the fact that you're not going to budge, because it's like so tempting to sell out. Like I found myself in situations where it's like, that could be, you know, like, I mean, you could negotiate with yourself, like why you could promote that product or whatever it is. But it's like, at the end of the day, that level of integrity, it matters so much, because people have been so misled by the food industry and by people that are willing to like take a quick buck to promote a food that they are trying to position as healthy. And it's like at the expense of all of these people's confusion and health, that's just like such a problem.
It is. And it is a lot, you know, especially in these COVID pandemic times when finances are really tough for people and a payday looks really exciting, and like just not even exciting, just like survivability, but like it takes so much more heart and sweat and tears to like prevent the breakdown of your reputation than it does to, you know, it can be like, you can break that in an overnight. And like, that's something that you and I have talked about offline, obviously, like building your brand, and don't ever dilute it for something you don't believe in, right? And to anyone out there who's like health coaching or a nutritionist or a dietitian and these big companies, like ask yourself if you would eat it yourself, if you would feed it to your clients, to your children, like, can we do better? Can we expect better? Because if we're not the ones expecting better, like nothing can change.
Yeah, I could not agree more with that. And it's the only way to create the change. And the people that are selling things like, you know, Coca-Cola and other products, like they're not consuming the products. And the athletes that are advertising for the Big Macs and the Whoppers and the sodas and everything, like they're also not consuming those products. Yeah. But it's like so unfortunate that when I was in graduate school, I interned at CSPI, the Center for Science and the Public Interest, that I'm obsessed with. They're a nonprofit. They take no outside money, and they're one of the only organizations in DC that doesn't take any outside money. It was created by Dr. Michael Jacobson. So I went to this interview with Michael Jacobson when when Michelle Kwan had just been promoted. I forget if she was promoting Pepsi or Coke, but there was an advertisement for her as like this Olympic athlete. She was also on the like President's Council. It was like Obama's Healthier President's Council initiative for athletes that were specifically chosen. And we went to this media interview that he had that he just like brought me to like watch him. It was so cool and fun.
Amazing internship.
And he's like, this is a huge conflict of interest that these athletes are making a ton of money and benefiting from young children thinking that this is the way that they got to where they are by fueling off of these empty calories that are contributing to worsened health outcomes. And also that they have this double standard where they're accepting these positions as health advocates. And then they're also on the other side making a lot of money off of these promotions. And it's like, until more people are willing to take a stand, we're going to continue in the state that we're in.
Totally. Well, you're taking a stand, and I am like so thankful for another beating drum out there, just like putting out the good stuff. I literally could talk to you seriously all day. So we'll have to have you back. We'll be just as passionate. Maybe we'll tone it down a little bit. I don't know. I'm going to go listen to this again and be like, no, it's such good stuff. Like it's awesome. Like it was a really, really fun call. And I'm so excited just to get this podcast out there. So thank you so much for spending your afternoon with me. I guess the one question that I will ask you before we go is, what does body love mean to you?
I think that body love means not putting too much pressure on yourself, and continuing to just show up in your best self every day, and knowing that every day that's going to look different, but prioritizing fueling the cells in your body with the highest quality of information that you can give to your cells so that you can function at your highest level and feel really good and have more purpose and meaning in your life as a result.
Love it. Fuel your purpose, everyone. Feed those cells what they need. Where can they find you for more juicy information?
So my website is beingbrigid.com, which is my first name is spelled rigid with a B at the front of it. It's the easiest way to say BRIGID. And that's also my Instagram handle. And I've been actually like engaging in Twitter a little bit more recently.
Tweet.
Sometimes Instagram just feels a little toxic to me. And I love the quick information that you can get from Twitter, but I'm at Being Brigid on all of the platforms.
Love it so much. You guys, if you're looking for a BWBK trusted source of information, scientifically backed studies, a very approachable way to change your life and get and build your relationship with wellness and improve your nutrition, Brigid is the way to go. It was such a pleasure to have you on the show. I'm so excited for the rock star that you already are, but I know you're just on your little rocket ship to the moon. So excited to have known you for so long and to watch you grow. So,
and to have played you were such an inspiration when I met you and when you started giving me the recommendations that you did when I had no idea what I was doing at all.
I love it. Well, I'm so happy to have been able to help you because you're sharing priceless, valuable information that you're making it easy for people to understand how to change their life. You're making the world a better place, babe.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for your time. Have a great rest of your day, and we will definitely talk soon.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you for listening to Be Well by Kelly. Please subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Learn more at BeWellByKelly.com and follow me on Instagram at BeWellByKelly. I would love if you picked up my books, Body Love and Body Love Every Day. They're sold on Amazon and at all major booksellers.